So in the world of MMA, you win a fight, you're in your peak. You lose a fight, you're suddenly washed. And especially with Israel Adesanya's recent defeat against Joe Pyfer, I've been kind of pushing the narrative that I don't think Adesanya is washed, and I've been getting quite a bit of pushback from fans in my comments, fans of the UFC and just MMA in general who feel that he is washed. And when it comes down to how do you even determine whether a fighter is washed or not, to me, there's two clear examples. The first being Frankie Edgar, and the second being Anderson Silva. Now, when you watch Frankie Edgar versus Chris Gutierrez and the knee that hit Frankie, if you've ever seen a Frankie Edgar fight, you know this is a fast guy. You know he's a bit small. He's always been a bit small for the division, but he's a fast guy, and that speed wasn't there. His head was on the center line, and he got clipped. And that's kind of been the story of his career for his past few fights until his retirement. So that's a very clear washed guy, and I don't even like to use that because it's a kind of a mean term for a legend like Frankie. And then Anderson Silva as well. When he broke his leg against Chris Weidman, when you have a guy who depends upon movement and head movement, and of course head movement isn't just moving your head, it starts from the waist and the hips and then to your legs. When you break your leg like that, like Silva, especially at the higher weight classes, you can just tell he wasn't really quite as agile or as quite as quick. And on top of the fact that, yeah, the division did start improving, right? During Anderson Silva's time period, he was fighting absolute cans, and then now he's fighting Uriah Hall and guys like that who are slightly better than the previous generation. And so he went from like a D tier middleweight division to like a B or C tier, which is what Silva was fighting in when he was on that massive loss of his what do you call it, like a streak, right? But when it comes to fighters like Cody Garbrandt or Israel Adesanya, I don't think they're washed. I really don't agree with that narrative at all, and I'm here to explain why and how I think fans are very quick to point to a guy and say he's washed rather than the different circumstances that might be involved here. So we're going to start with Cody Garbrandt, and this is a guy who I think quite a few people have been saying for a while now that he just wasn't the same, and his performance against Dominic Cruz was what it was. It was incredible, but then he got knocked out back-to-back by TJ Dillashaw. He's just not the same. Well, I got to disagree with you there. First and foremost, a lot of you guys really don't remember how that Cody Garbrandt Dominic Cruz fight went because it was not like Garbrandt was styling on him for 5 rounds. It was a very close fight. One judge had it 3-2 for Garbrandt. It was not like, I think Dominic Cruz outlanded him like every round. You know, Garbrandt won mainly on knocking him down and on body language. Dominic Cruz was not, he did not get beaten badly, and it was a completely dominant performance by Garbrandt. Nothing like that. And also, Dominic Cruz, it turns out, had tendonitis, really bad injury. Couldn't even walk properly for several months before the fight with Garbrandt. So the Cruz he fought was not even top shape Cruz. And before people say, well, he's just making excuses, keep in mind this is Cruz we're talking about. He had to retire because of injuries. Like, this guy's been dealing with injuries all throughout his career, had to vacate belts and stuff. So I believe him, and even if you watch the fight, that's an example of a guy who does not look the same. Cruz really did look a lot slower and nowhere near as reactive against Garbrandt as he usually did, but it was still a really good win for Garbrandt. But if you look at his previous fights, Takeya Mizugaki and Thomas Almeida, he was not beating top 5 ranked guys. He was not beating, the absolute best of the bantamweight division. He was very lucky to get the title shot when he did, and he won the way he won. It was everything coming together, the perfect circumstances, the perfect everything, and it worked out. But he didn't even deserve the title shot. You got Imavov, who's number 1 and is coming off of wins over Adesanya and Kyle Baralho, and he's being looked past for Strickland. So these guys are beating the top contenders and aren't getting the title shot. And you have Dominic Cruz who got it. Perfect opportunity, but then he gets KO'd back-to-back by the division's greatest knockout artist, TJ Dillashaw. And then he gets KO'd by Pedro Munoz. And again, you can't call him washed. You can't just say, well, he was at his peak in Dominic Cruz, then he fell off. No, he was dealing with a much slower Cruz. On top of the fact that Cody Garbrandt's always been really fast and he's really powerful. Like those are the two things he has. He has no fight IQ, but he's very fast and he's very powerful. But when you're up against Pedro Munoz or anybody just slightly better even than his previous opponents, suddenly that fight IQ, that lack of fight IQ, though, that brawlish style when his chin isn't considered like the strongest, it's not there. He comes back, I think, against Rafael Sansao, and he wins in brutal fashion there. But his career since then, he went on a couple of wins against guys you probably couldn't name, and then he lost to Johnny Barcelos, I believe it was. Like, then he lost to Davison Figueiredo and stuff like that. You know, say what you want. Like T.J. Dillashaw came back after his big layoff due to EPO, after injuries upon injuries, and he beat Corey Sandhagen. Now you can argue whether that was actually a loss or not for Corey because it was such a close fight, but it was still just that. It was a very close fight. One of the best fights I've ever seen, by the way. One of those fights you can always just go back and rewatch. Cody Garbrandt at no point in time could have a close fight with Corey Sandhagen. Like, let's make that very clear. T.J. Dillashaw, coming off of a couple of years off and a lot of injuries, had that close of a fight. Cody Garbrandt never could, and I know styles make fights, but Cody Garbrandt has a very one-dimensional style of just looking for that big shot, and when he doesn't land that big shot, he is there to be finished. So I don't think he's washed. He looks just as good as he always did. It's just he's not fighting a Dominic Cruz who can barely move or anything like that. He's not fighting a Takeya Mizugaki. Now he's fighting Davison Figueiredo and T.J. Dillashaw and some of these other guys who aren't very good, like the fight he just had. The guy did keep low-blowing him, so I'm not going to hold that against him too much. But he doesn't look any slower than before. Against Kai Kara France, he did not look any slower. He looks just like the usual Cody Garbrandt. He's just not the smartest fighter now, is he? We move on to Leon Edwards. People forget, man, he almost got KO'd by Brian Barberena, the Leon Edwards. People forget, man, he almost got finished by Nate Diaz in the last minute of his fight. Look, Leon Edwards, man, some of you might think he's washed. I know some people say, oh, well, he knocked out Kamaru and he was losing that fight. It was at altitude. Okay, then he goes back in the rematch. He wins. He cheats quite a bit, but he gets the point taken away. Still wins. He follows it up with an absolute abysmal performance against Colby. Colby was so terrified. I think part of the problem was that Colby had talked so much garbage to Leon, and I think Colby just didn't want to get KO'd. He was terrified of the head kick, and he just wanted to survive. Even if he lost a decision, it was like, well, at least I didn't get finished. So Colby typically pushes the pace and all that. He wasn't doing it in this fight, and Leon should have taken advantage, and he didn't. Again, the Brian Barberena performance, not the best in hindsight. I think he took Cowboy Cerrone to a decision, and Cowboy Cerrone is a good fighter, right? Especially during his peak, but was that even peak Cowboy Cerrone? And Nate Diaz, really the walking punching bag. Of course, Nate Diaz is a very difficult guy to finish, but he gets caught at the very last minute, almost gets finished. The Leon Edwards special, right? And then he goes on, and he loses pretty roughly to Bilal Muhammad and Sean Brady, and he did do really well against Kamaru Usman in the takedown defense. The first fight, again, it's kind of everybody looked really terrible on that card. I think that was the Paulo Costa Luke Rockhold fight, and those guys looked really slow. Everybody on that card, Jose Aldo Marab, I believe, was also on the Utah card. Everybody just looked terrible. So I'm not going to hold that too much. The second fight against Kamaru, he did look better, but keep in mind he was cheating quite a bit. And yeah, he got a point taken away, but when you get a point taken away, the fight continues on the feet. So it's like you don't have to work your way back up. But I'm not going to hold that too much against him. Still an impressive performance, but it's clear that Bilal Muhammad and Sean Brady, and I know people are going to say now Bilal was never that good or Sean Brady was never that good. Bilal had a good performance against JDM. Bilal Muhammad looked pretty good against JDM, and sure, he got shut out by Ian Gary, but Ian Gary beat Carlos Prates. Like, how good is Ian Gary, right? Sean Brady, people are going to say he isn't very good because of his loss to Moraes, and I'm going to say that's not the case because Moraes is so tall and long, and he's just difficult to get to the hips of. You could see that Sean Brady, I was watching it live going, why aren't you shooting? But if you go back and look, it was very difficult to get to the hips of a guy who's so out of range and is so long, and he didn't want to get kneed flush across the face, right? So Leon fought two very strong wrestlers back to back. Then he fights Carlos Prates, and it turns out Prates just has nukes in his hands, right? So Carlos Prates ain't no Nate Diaz or Brian Barberena, right? Leon Edwards does not look any slower. Leon Edwards was always, he's a very technical guy, right? Like the low kicks, the jabs. He's not a power guy. He had like one swift knockout early in his career, and then he decided I'm just going to have decisions for the rest of my career, right? So it's not like he looked any worse against Carlos Prates than he usually does. He looked good. He got him down even, got to his back, couldn't do much with it. But it's just the division, right? When you're fighting, if you were to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov, he probably gets stiffened out as well. But put him up against who are some guys in the welterweight division? I think he would do pretty well against like a Joaquin Buckley. I think he'd do decently well. I don't think he'd get sparked out cold, honestly. Put him against Usman. I think he beats Usman in the third fight as well. So I wouldn't call him washed, right? Just kind of been the same fighter, and that's cost him recently in his career. He hasn't really developed beyond the single head kick that he landed, right? Next guy, Robert the Reaper Whittaker. So this is one I am not hearing a lot of people say he's washed, because the way Whittaker's career works is that like he wins a couple and then he loses and he wins, right? So he had those two fights with Yoel Romero, both very close fights. Some people argue that he should have lost the second fight, but Yoel did miss weight, so I'm not going to hold it against him. He loses to Adesanya, then he goes on a bit of a win streak. He challenges for the belt again. I think he should have won, but the judges thought otherwise. He goes on another bit of a small streak, right? Wins over Marvin Vettori and guys. Then he fights DDP, I believe, right? And then he loses to DDP. Then he fights, I think, Paulo Costa. He beats Costa. He might have gotten another win in the meantime. I'm not sure. But then he loses to Chimaev, which in hindsight is not a bad loss at all, considering, yeah, sure, Chimaev couldn't do that to DDP, but we've already seen DDP's a lot stronger than Whittaker, right? How easily he took him down in their fight. And then afterward, Whittaker lost to RDR. So this is like the first time Whittaker's going on back-to-back losses, the first time in however many years he's not in the top 5 in the middleweight division. Dude, Whittaker's always been really good. He's one of those guys that, unless you absolutely suck like Marvin Vettori, you're going to have a close fight with him. You know, Darren Till thought he was championship material because he had a close fight with Whittaker. Like, he kept saying that over and over again. Oh, I know I took Whittaker. I could have won that last round if I didn't get taken down, blah, 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 blah. And he thought he would be world champion material, and then he eventually, he wasn't, it turns out. And when it comes to RDR, it's just a bad style matchup because Whittaker is not that big for the division anyways, and he's talking about moving up to light heavyweight, and I'm like, dude, you're not even big for middleweight. I think you should go down to welterweight, which is probably your natural weight class as far as where your height and your reach and all that, where you can maximize that. But middleweight is such a crappy division that he's been able to get away and get to the top, I think, because he was fighting Marvin Vettori and Paulo Costa and Derek Brunson. That Brunson fight might have been in welterweight. They were both welterweights, now that I think about it. But I don't like his chances up at light heavyweight, but maybe he could crafty his way to a win, lighter man skill. But I can't call Whittaker washed, because when your losses are a guy who's like 5 inches taller than you and you knock him down, right? And he gets a split decision. It wasn't like a clear unanimous, he got absolutely schooled. It was a close fight. And sure, RDR lost to Brendan Allen and Caio Braulio, but again, different stylistic matchups. Robert Whittaker is a much smaller guy than RDR. The knees and the clinches were a bit more difficult for Whittaker, but he still made it a very close fight. He's still very, very good. He doesn't look any slower than he did when he was fighting guys like Cannonier or the second Izzy fight or even Vettori. Fight IQ still there, did all the right things against RDR, just was having a difficult time with those clinches and those knees. And again, I'm not going to hold the Chimaev loss to him. That is in hindsight not a bad loss at all. And he did school Vettori, which is always a good sign because unless you're absolutely trash, you're not going to lose to Vettori. And Whittaker, I believe Vettori is coming off the win over Costa, which, again, you got to start asking these questions, like, how good is Costa actually? I think he gets crushed by Azamat, but Whittaker's not washed, dude. Like, again, I don't think this is a huge narrative, but I have seen people use it, and I'm not a fan of it. I don't think Whittaker's washed at all. And we're going to end this with Israel Adesanya. So, man, I've already talked about this so many times, and every time I talk about it, I get, like pushed back by people. Like, no, you don't get it. Izzy, dude, I'm not like a huge Izzy fan. I've said this a million times. I'm really not. I was personally rooting for Joe Pyfer. It's just when you call Izzy wash, you're taking away from the wins of Strickland and DDP and Imavov and Pyfer. You're basically making their performances look less impressive. Like, this is still a very good Izzy. He looked fantastic against Imavov before the finish, right? Izzy's been having these weaknesses in his games, which a Marvin Vittori or a 40-year-old Anderson Silva or a Paulo Costa, who, by the way, has a smaller reach than Maravzar Evloev, who's in the featherweight division. It turns out these guys aren't able to take advantage of his weaknesses. He got head kicked and got wobbled by Kelvin Gastelum. For those of you guys saying his chin's almost gone, he almost got KO'd by Kelvin Gastelum, dude. Like 5'10", not even that, like 5'9" Kelvin Gastelum, who shouldn't be at middleweight. So, I mean, is his chin really gone? Was it ever really there? Like, was he ever... when it comes to the Pereira fight, he was able to avoid that left hook all the way until the 5th round where he got caught, right? So he's always had these sort of problems in his game. It's just Joe Rogan wouldn't shut up about how he's the greatest point range fighter in history, and he is very good at that, but he makes mistakes, and he's been able to get away with it because of the fact that he was fighting a 5'9" Kelvin Gastelum, a completely one-dimensional Marvin Vittori, a 40-year-old Anderson Silva, and Paulo Costa, who has a smaller reach than Movsar Evloev, Dustin Poirier, and Lerone Murphy. Like, Paulo Costa, if you're to measure his arms, he's got shorter arms than 2 featherweights and a lightweight. You could probably find guys at bantamweight who have a similar reach of 72 inches. I would not be surprised if Piotr Jan has 71 or 72 inch reach. Like, I'm not surprised Israel Adesanya was able to leg kick him at range and finish him. And now he's suddenly fighting Imavov, who's fantastic, a real technical savage. Cheats a lot, but he's very good. He's fighting DDP, who's incredibly strong. He's fighting Sean Strickland, who we're seeing now is a really tough cookie to solve. Strickland beat Imavov on 5 days' notice. He beat Brendan Allen. He's beaten... he was the first guy to fraud check that one guy. I can't even remember his name now. The guy that Joe Pyfer recently beat, Abus Magomedov. You know, Strickland was the first guy to check him, fraud check him, right? He beat Fluffy when Fluffy was on like an 8, 9, 10 fight win streak or whatever. Like, it turns out Adesanya is no longer fighting guys who aren't going to take advantage of his weaknesses, guys who are going to get him and clinch up against a cage like Cannonier or just stand there and get hit like Vittori. He's fighting the best of the best. The middleweight division during Anderson Silva's time was like a D to C tier. And then when Anderson Silva started losing a bit after, you know, the Uriah Halls and stuff showed up, then we got the Michael Bispings really coming to the fray, and Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. That was like the C to B tier range. Like, I'll never stop asking, how did Marvin Vittori ever fight for a belt? Like, I don't know how that's possible. This guy's not a championship level fighter, but he did. That would never happen today. You know, Marvin Vittori would never fight for a belt in current middleweight. You know, he can barely get ranked. He's already out of the rankings after he lost to, I believe, Bruno Ferreira. And you saw what happened to Bruno when he fought Gregory Rodriguez, right? So this is a completely different division. I still think Adesanya beats a lot of guys in the division. I think he could beat Fluffy Hernandez. I think that's a winnable match. Fluffy's chinny to the body, as Bedtime says. That's a winnable fight. He would demolish Roman Dolidze. He would do bad things to him. He would win his rematches, I think, against a Robert Whittaker or against a Cannonier who's still ranked. He could beat CLD. He could even beat Gregory Rodriguez. Gregory Rodriguez, by the way, let's not pretend like he isn't very easy to chin, and that Adesanya is so much quicker than him, right? So I don't think he's washed. I'm not going to take away anything from the performances of the guys who have beaten him. I think he's still very good. I just think the division's that much better. His chin is not gone. He was getting wobbled by Kelvin Gastelum with a head kick, a guy who's 5'9" and should not be landing a head kick in the first place, but he did. So I'm not going to take away anything from any of the guys who've beaten him. He's not washed, you know. He might be slightly slower, but he made up for that speed with strength. He's a lot more difficult to take down than he was earlier in his career. So I've gone on enough. I'm going to, I think, end it there. Look at these guys. None of them are washed. If you want to know what wash looked like, go to the last fight of Frankie Edgar's career. That was a guy who was clearly nowhere near as quick or as agile as he used to be. Watch Anderson Silva's fight against Uriah Hall. That was a completely different Anderson Silva. That's what being washed looks like. I think a Prime Silva would still lose to Uriah Hall. I'm being honest here, but that's for another day. So I'm just going to end it there now. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.